Who is he?
Posey, it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. This has been an incredibly thorough, if not depressing, debate in the state of funding of our police and fire service, and I think it's testament to how strongly members feel about this issue that we've had such passionate speeches today, and the frequency with which we're now debating this issue, both here in Westminster Hall and when the government are dragged into the chamber through urgent questions and in Home Office questions, how often this issue is raised. My honourable friend for Easington, in his usual mild-mannered and constructive way, gave a thorough overview of the issues facing our police and fire service. He's very fortunate to be represented by an outstanding police service in Durham, by the sounds of it, an excellent fire service as well, but they are under exceptional and unprecedented pressure and demand. And he gave a powerful speech in particular on Grenfell and spoke about the failings of our regulations, of that local authority and of the businesses. It was not by far and away the failure of those firefighters, those men and women that risked everything to go in and save others. He spoke about the madness of funding our police service through precept, and I will come on to that later, but he in particular is affected by this, representing Durham as he does, which has an exceptionally low council tax base and is therefore less able, even than other metropolitan areas, to fund the police to the level they need. And he asked the Minister whether this government have abandoned the principle of resource equalisation, and it certainly feels that they have when we're faced with a funding settlement that bears no relation to demand, no relation to need, no relation to operational resource, only to the number of houses that are over Band D in an area. How can any sane government allocate resources to our police service in such a way? My honourable friend from Manchester Withington made an important intervention about the resilience and the legitimacy of policing, which is undeniably being undermined by the cuts to policing, and it's leaving communities feeling that there's no point in reporting crimes at all. They just don't believe that it's going to be acted on, that the police are going to be able to respond. And my honourable friend for Batley and Spen, in her usual impassioned way, she's a constant fighter for our police, spoke about those response times and that people are giving up reporting, that entire communities feel abandoned, and that is also leading to some areas of the country turning to vigilante responses, feeling that the only way to deal with crime is to deal with it themselves. And she gave some shocking statistics. West Yorkshire has experienced the highest increase in violent crime in the country. 227% increase in violent crime, Mr Hosey, over the last 6 years. That is truly shocking, and yet West Yorkshire again receives one of the lowest funding settlements. How can that possibly be right? Now, she explicitly asked the Minister to guarantee the pension costs for both police and fire after 2019 and 20. The Home Office barely covered those off for 1920 in the funding settlement this year, but still they have no police services and fire services across the country have no guarantees beyond 2020, so we'd be really grateful if the Minister could respond to that explicit point as well. The Honourable Lady for Glasgow Central made some important points about the potential consequences of a no-deal Brexit and the demand that is being placed on our police services in preparing for them, not just in dealing with the potential consequences of coming out of systems like Schengen Information System 2 or the European Criminal Records Information System, or indeed the potential impact of us withdrawing or playing a lesser role in Europol, but in the preparing for a no-deal in the potential of widespread civil unrest, or of officers having to be deployed to ports where they're not currently being asked to police, and the lack of resilience in our police force in having to be able to deal with unpredicted and large-scale disruptions to the police was highlighted last year when police were having to be deployed all over the country to cover the visit of President Trump. If there had been a terrorist attack or a particular spike or even a murder in any of our police forces that had deployed significant numbers of officers in mutual aid requests during that time, it would have really shown how incredibly stretched to breaking point our police services are. And the Honourable Member for Strangford made some important points of the demand on police and fire, and we had a really important debate at that point about how important the role of prevention is for the fire service and the police, and how these cuts have reduced our emergency services to nothing more than a responsive service, a reactive service that only turns up when the absolute worst has happened. And again, not only does that mean that we are storing up problems for the future, that we are failing to prevent crimes and fires from happening in the first place, it absolutely undermines that legitimacy in our emergency services. It erodes the ability of our police to police by consent, because that vital neighbourhood policing model has been so eroded. Everyone today, Mr Hosey, has paid tribute to our police and firefighters, and they've been absolutely right to do so. It is our emergency service workers that we rely on in our time of need. So the twin failure of this government to invest in both the fire and our police service must represent one of the most chilling consequences of a decade of Tory rule. When you unpick the safety net and undermine the last resort, when you take such risks with public safety as this government has done, then you must be held to account on the consequences of those fateful decisions. And when we look around Europe, who in the aftermath of the financial crisis, no other major economy cut their police by proportionally more than our own. The zeal with which the Conservative Party and government have slashed our emergency services is unmatched, and we are one of Europe's leading nations when it comes to cuts to our police. Our once proud police service, one of the best police services in the world, has been critically undermined by this government, who once called themselves the party of law and order. And the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh South West is absolutely right. Different political choices can be made. We've seen the different consequences in Scotland of a government that has made different political choices to this one. And turning to the fire brigade, despite increases in the overall incidents firefighters attend, funding to fire services have been cut by 15%. As the fire brigade will say, one of the most important aspects of their works is to minimise risk and prevent fires from taking place in the first place. It is staggering, therefore, that 19 months on from the tragedy at Grenfell Tower, there are still buildings in this country wrapped in Grenfell-style cladding with residents who do not know if their home is safe. There were 437 tower blocks with the same or similar cladding, and 370 have yet to be replaced. The government need to get their act together on this, and fast. And it is a matter of deep regret that as the inquiry into Grenfell continues, there is a continued delay into phase 2 of the inquiry, the phase which will seek answers from the building owners, local authorities, politicians, the very people, as my honourable friend for Easington said, and in the words of Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the FBU, who allowed public safety to be undermined. The one thing we know about the fire that took place at Grenfell is the firefighters, in the most impossible, unimaginable of conditions, showed bravery well beyond any of us can imagine. They put their lives at risk, they risked their children and families growing up without them in order to save other families. They are, in our minds, in the mind of my parties, and as a granddaughter of a firefighter, absolute heroes. Those who are casting aspersions, as that disgraceful documentary did on Monday, long before the inquiry has concluded, should take a long, hard look in the mirror, in my opinion. Rather than letting us down, it is our firefighters and our police that have been so badly let down by this government. And the consequences of the government's action have been stark. Over 21,000 officers gone, nearly 7,000 PCSOs, 17,000 police staff. Police recorded violent crime is at record levels. Knife crime is at record levels. Arrests have halved in a decade. Unsolved crimes stand at almost 2 million cases. So with this as the backdrop, it was unbelievable that the government chose to bring forward the funding settlement that they did last month. And the reaction to it from police leaders across the country has been stark. The West Midlands Police Chief Constable has calculated it will mean another real terms cut. In North Yorkshire, The Police and Crime Panel has rejected the imposition of another council tax increase. In Lincolnshire, the Chief Constable has been forced to make £3.2 million in savings this year as a direct result of the funding settlement. And despite asking local ratepayers to pay the full whack of £24 a year, they are still cutting officers this year, people paying more for a much lesser service. Because at the heart of the inequity in the funding settlement, which hits policing hard, is the fact it is basing increased funding on the ability of an area to pay. It is basing operational improvements on the number of big houses in an area. So we have to ask the question, why was each force asked to put together a management statement? Why did the police minister go around every force to assess the level of demand when they appear to have completely ignored it? Serious crime is expected to increase substantially in many forces, as are areas of protecting vulnerable people, which are projected to arise. This means big increases in demand for missing persons, for stalking, harassment, cyber crime, and in managing sexual offenders. This is a massive challenge that is only expected to increase. So people will be in utter disbelief that once again the government are suffering the police with a 9th consecutive year of real terms cuts once the government imposed pension black hole is taken into account. Now, the policing minister promised he would help forces manage that pension black hole. He said every police and crime commissioner will have their government grant funding protected in real terms. I'm afraid, Mr Hosey, that was disingenuous at best and demonstrably false at worst. Nationwide, there will be a cut in central government funding in cash terms, never mind real terms. So rather than using that investment to help meet the operational demands on missing persons, on child sexual exploitation, on serious crime, every penny of that will be sunk on pension costs. They are giving with one hand and taking with the other. It is perverse and it is creating a postcode lottery. Mr Hosey, these arguments are well rehearsed. Honourable members in here have raised them time and time again. It appears there are fundamental differences between these sides of the House on how our police and fire services should be funding. So I would just ask the Minister, if she can, to justify this. How can West Yorkshire, that has experienced a 227% rise in violent crime, receive just 13% of the money it's lost since 2010, in comparison to Surrey, who has seen half that rise in violent crime, receive 36% of the money it's lost since 2010? How can Durham, that has seen one of the largest increases in police recorded crime, receive just 13% of the money it's lost since 2010, in comparison to Wiltshire, that has seen one of the lowest increases in police recorded crime, receiving 29% of the money it's lost since 2010? Can she confirm that this government has abandoned the principle of resource equalisation and that instead it is their philosophy that only those areas that can pay that deserve to be kept safe by this government? Yeah.